Welcome to our weekly program of conversation. We call it Moral Side of the News. We're glad you're with us this week. I'm John Blim with the WHAS Crusade for Children. With me, as usual, is a distinguished panel. Rabbi Gaylia Rooks, the Temple, Reverend Daniel Corrie Shull, Burnett Avenue Baptist Church, Reverend Jason Crosby, Crescent Hill Baptist Church, and Father John Stoltz, St. Aloysius Catholic Church. Our first topic: poverty, substance abuse, and mental health problems continue to be key factors in child abuse and neglect in Kentucky, as it leads the nation in the rate of child mistreatment for the third year in a row. The Federal Child Maltreatment Annual Report, published in January, based on 2019 information, ranks Kentucky highest with 20.1 cases of child abuse or neglect per 100,000 children, followed closely by West Virginia. So now we turn to our panel on Moral Side of the News and your thoughts on how to improve child welfare.
It's a staggering statistic. It's a terrible indictment of our Commonwealth and our country, because even though we're leading the nation, there are plenty of states that have just unacceptable levels of child abuse and maltreatment. And I can't help but feel that it shouldn't be that difficult, not to get rid of, but to make a significant improvement in these statistics if we just devoted the money to this issue. I know that money is not always the answer, and it's not easy to come by, but so much of this could be avoided by there's so many ways. Jefferson County has opened its first family drug court. I know that the Temple and a number of our members were involved in doing private fundraising for that I was part of. Having a family drug court would make those cases go through the court system faster. A lot of these children are badly abused during a time when we actually know they're not really necessarily in a safe environment, but we can't get them through the court system fast enough. So I can't stress how important it is to have, I think every county should have family drug courts that prioritize, because that's all they do, and get these cases into the courts faster. Again, throwing money at a problem isn't always the answer, but if we put more money into having more social workers, our social workers are so overwhelmed. There's tremendous burnout because of the caseload. I have friends who are social workers who, sometimes it's months before they get to a case, and then they feel so incredibly guilty because of the conditions in which they find the children. I myself have had experiences. I called Child Protective Services about a situation. This was maybe 10 years ago. They didn't get back to me in spite of 3 phone calls. They didn't get back to me for several days. And then, as far as I know, never followed up on the situation at all. And it's just, what does that say about us as this great, wealthy country? And I know, we're not that great and we're not that wealthy anymore. Well, some people are. There's been so much more of the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer, and the lack of a middle class. Not that this doesn't happen in wealthy families, but they're more likely to take the child to the pediatrician or a hospital to get some counseling help, some drug intervention help for themselves. It's just, as we have more and more people living in poverty and on the edge of poverty, we need to make greater efforts to protect our children. The innocent children. It is truly a stain on this Commonwealth that we hold the top position in this area.
Thank you, Gaylia. One thing that I noted in the reporting on this particular issue that stood out to me, it's an issue that we've talked about on this show on many occasions, and that is that one of the ingredients that has put us at the top of this list is access to firearms in the home. And Gaylia, you mentioned throwing money at a problem doesn't always solve it, but that would certainly help in this situation. But there are just some common sense steps that our legislature can take in Kentucky regarding common sense gun legislation that could directly impact this situation when it comes to either abuse that then leads to suicide by firearm, or when it comes to children being in an unsafe environment where a firearm is not properly stored and protected. These are largely cost-less steps that can be taken that would help remedy this situation.
But I think it's an issue that needs to become a legislative priority. And I agree with what both Gaylia and Jason have said about the issue of the place of firearms within this whole issue, and then also just a sense of a stain on our Commonwealth, and that we need some more funding around it. I think Kentuckians need to see it as a priority for the sake of human dignity and protecting those who are vulnerable. And also the ancillary issues around it, drug abuse and things like that, are issues also that are in need of proactive healing. And for our culture, not that it would resolve all of that, but and that is also something around some funding with the work of social service agencies, which are often underfunded, that really I think could make a great contribution to help preventing this. But seeking out to say that as a culture to notice it, it's the prevalence of it and where Kentucky ranks, and to say that we want to protect children as a priority, as a cultural value. I think it's something that we need to see and state for ourselves.
I think that we have a multiplicity of issues that contribute to our standing with child abuse, and quite frankly, it's embarrassing. It's embarrassing because there are so many people in the world who want to have children and cannot. And when people who are the custodians of these children mistreat them and abuse them, it is a blight on our society as a whole. This is exacerbated here across the Commonwealth now, with children not being in public schools, which are often sort of the only outlet that some children have, and the only place where there is an eye on them to ensure that there is some recourse in the event of abuse or neglect or what have you. So this is something that the Commonwealth of Kentucky really has to confront boldly. And I support what the governor is attempting to do to ensure that we get off of this horrendous list of states with such a high percentage of child abuse.
And the statistics that John, our wonderful moderator, began with, these numbers are coming from the 2019 year. As you said, Corrie, we're terribly frightened and concerned about what's happening this year. First of all, millions of people are being pushed into poverty, losing their jobs. More and more people are stuck at home, working at home, not having their usual outlets, their friends, their support systems. There's just, the kids are around abusive parents more than they used to be. And of course, it was the number one area of reporting of suspect child abuse and harm is the teachers. When a kid goes into school, with whatever it is, physical manifestations, and also emotional manifestations. Jason, you mentioned about guns, which, I mean, most Kentuckians actually are in favor of sensible gun laws that would protect our children. And when we talk about the rates of suicide, especially teen suicide, you know, I'm concerned that those are going up this year also because the kids don't have their usual outlets, things that have been depressing and upsetting to them that, you know, they could, you know, when you're in a sports team or a club at school or you just have your friends, that always helps. And also there's so many misassumptions about what happens with teenagers and suicide. A lot of people believe, well, if they talk about it, that's a good thing because that means they won't do it. And that is totally false. And it's just a lot of parents, you know, even if they're concerned, oh, my child seems to be bullied online or seems to be morose or depressed, you know, they don't have the resources, financial or community resources to get professional help that could really make such a difference. And there's obviously such a desperate need for this.
There was a chaplain friend of mine that offered some words of wisdom to me once. He said, pain will either be transferred or pain will be transformed. Pain will be transferred or transformed. And I think that there's no greater manifestation of the transference that pain, the pain that so many people are feeling. You know, the adults that are the abusers are really suffering. And a lot of people in our community, in our state, in our nation are suffering in pain in ways that I've never witnessed or experienced. And I think that's a big factor. That's a spiritual, psychological, emotional issue at play. And so remedying that through closing the wealth gap, for instance, and providing good, meaningful community for people, those are other solutions to this problem that we face.
All right, you're listening and watching Moral Side of the News. We're glad you're here. And we have a second topic today. Governor Andy Beshear filed a lawsuit to stop Kentucky lawmakers from stripping him of his ability to implement life-saving public health measures during the pandemic. GOP lawmakers have long argued Beshear overreached with his use of emergency powers to restrict public gatherings, schools, and businesses. Panel, the governor says, quote, the General Assembly attempted to surrender to COVID-19 and accept the casualties, end of quote. What are your thoughts, panel? Let's get started.
Well, I am saddened that it had to go to the court system in order to resolve it, that it couldn't be resolved through a dialogue with legislature and the governor, that they couldn't come to terms with it. My sense is that from what I hear, and not with any political bias, but even early on, even those who may have opposed the governor politically actually admired his leadership around Kentucky's handling of the pandemic and what it's done. And I'm not quite understanding how the legislature took their point of action in seeking to restrict his powers, because I'm not sure anyone had talked about it being an abuse of power as he was doing it. And many talked about how it seemed to be good for the state. So I'm at a loss there, and just wish that there had been more dialogue around this to see what was really good for the state and what's been done.
Well, Father, I don't think the dialogue would have helped it, because the people who have filed the legislation to curb the governor's power, and the individuals who have filed also the order, I don't know what the official word is, for the governor to be impeached, are people who you cannot communicate with. They are not reasonable people. In order to have dialogue and communication, to have conversation, both sides must be reasonable. Both sides must have um, pure motives. And what we see from Jason Nemes and many within the Republican caucus is we see people who are busy playing politics. We see people who are busy taking their cues from the furthest edges of the Republican Party and those who are continuing to adhere to Donald Trump's ideology and all of the craziness that continues to infect society as a consequence of his ideology and those who support it and enlarge it and embolden it. And unfortunately, we here in Kentucky cannot escape that even in the midst of a pandemic. You can't talk to those people. And so unfortunately, what needs to happen is they really need to be, they themselves should be run out of seats of power because they have demonstrated that they do not care about lives. They care about political gamemanship. And I think they all ought to be ashamed of themselves, quite honestly. And, as you can see, I am African American. Black people have been impacted most greatly, most severely by COVID-19. And the governor has done his best to ensure that resources were distributed in an equitable manner, to ensure that all minority communities were able to be tested and even now are able to receive vaccines, even though there are issues that complicate that from the federal government. And so I really resent people like Jason Nemes and these other these other politicians who are making it their business to ensure that Kentucky is unsafe and unhealthy for people. I resent it, and they are an embarrassment to the Commonwealth.
And that's exactly what they're doing. I mean, they clamor about their individual rights and how this is an abuse of power, but what he is doing, I mean, he was elected to take care of our Commonwealth, to lead us. And I think that the country has forgotten what a good leader is. Someone who cares more about the lives and the well-being of their constituents more than their own political power and gain. I beg to differ, John, but I think you're wrong when you say that at the beginning that no one disapproved of what the governor was doing. There were always people who were here in Kentucky saying that he had overreached his power. And that's what they're trying to curb now. And if you consider this an overreach of power to prevent these super spreader events and, closing the schools and doing things that actually made Kentucky, on the top of the list of states in our country that were handling the pandemic better than others under the circumstances. I mean, that was real leadership. And yet there are people now who would have his power curtailed in a time of emergency. We're not talking about abuse of power in general. We're talking about his using the power vested in him to protect our nation, our part of the nation, our Commonwealth. And I really believe that he wants what's best for all of Kentucky. And I think that he has shown that in so many ways. The state Supreme Court, I think it was a unanimous decision originally when they tried to fight this. It was. I see nodding.
Yes.
And so I hope that it will be thrown out again. I think he's going for a temporary injunction until the case can be heard, fully. But
Gaylia, the injunction was granted this morning. So.
Oh, okay. Okay. I haven't actually even looked at the news. I'm having a tough day.
The critical part about it is when Matt Bevin pardoned people who had done incredibly horrible things. These voices were silent about an abuse of power. And now these people who were in the same offices when Matt Bevin was pardoning people who had contributed, who had relatives who contributed to his campaign, and they should have been in jail. They should have been in prison. Those voices were silent, but now you're filing all of these lawsuits about a governor trying to save lives. It just doesn't make sense.
I think that, one, it is unlikely that these measures that have now been passed, vetoed, and the veto has been overridden, and now there's the injunction in place. I do think that if we're looking ahead, that it is unlikely that these measures will be ruled constitutional, because it appears that they are likely, as other challenges to Beshear's authority that have been posed, have been ruled unconstitutional. I am hopeful and optimistic that this will move in the same direction. Two, Corrie, you mentioned one representative, Jason Nemus, a couple of times. I do think it's important to point out that in this case, Representative Osborne in Prospect has been one of the most outspoken folks when it comes to curtailing the governor's power in both the state house and Senate. And then three, Father Stoltz, I too wish at some point there would have been dialogue, but the fact that these bills are HB 1, SB 1, and SB 2 are very telling. The fact that these were the number 1 and 2 legislative priorities of the House and Senate moving into this legislative session is a clear indicator that this plan was moving ahead. And then this week, just before the veto was overridden, the governor shared in one of his press conferences that he had tried to reach out to House and Senate leadership to potentially cut a deal and have some additional dialogue. And he was only informed, if I'm not mistaken, after the vetoes were overridden, that perhaps now there would be some conversation. So the talk about hoping for dialogue and people wringing their hands about this being adjudicated in the courts now, that's just, to me, window dressing on that political gamesmanship that we've talked about.
And shameful window dressing, because as you so aptly pointed out, Jason, that's our number 1 priority, not protecting Kentuckiana.
And to think about our first topic, to think about the fact that we were talking about child abuse, and while we're at the top of that list, the fact that in this legislative session that the top priorities are to literally jeopardize the health and welfare of the people of the Commonwealth. There's a reason we're at the top of that list, and part of it has to do with leadership that is not valuing life.
We discussed on this show earlier about where my individual rights end, and I had made the example, I remember, about driving with seatbelts. It's a law. It's required. That's infringing on your civil liberties. It's not even protecting other people. Someone else, maybe it was you, Jason, had made the comparison. It's like secondhand smoke, that would be, you're harming other people. But I mean, it's been proven that this is harmful to other people, for people not to be protected. You know what? You're right. You, John, I'm sorry. These are people who, a lot of them are arguing with the science. They don't even believe that.
But you know what? I think this calls it calls our attention to how sacred the work of public service is. Mm-hmm. And when you have people in public service who don't care about people, we all suffer. And America really would do well to take a long, hard look at what we have done to our society through the people that we have placed in high positions of power, from Kentucky all the way to the U.S. Capitol. We have too many people who hold public office who are more concerned about playing games. I mean, these are just games. I don't even know. What do you get from trying to impeach a governor in the middle of a pandemic? What is to gain from trying to pass legislation that would curb a sitting governor's powers in the middle of a crisis?
It's greed. It's power greed. It's power.
Well, I think in our traditions, Rabbi Rooks, we have a word for this. In your tradition and in my tradition, it's called sin. And in the moral side of the news, I think we ought to call this sin what it is.
I don't think, though. Well, first of all, just to go back to my point, my first point was a lament that there wasn't dialogue, but that's really what it was, that it couldn't be. And recognizing that, in my sense, the governor was taking right steps, and that it's just too bad that those could not be recognized, because I think popularly and in many ways they were recognized by people that he was doing a good job with it, and that the legislature's stance didn't make too much sense around that. Secondly, I also think the legislature has learned or has seen what other states have done in terms of one of the northern states where a governor got elected. The legislature took moves to curb their powers, even, I think, before they took office. So that's being done in other states. And thirdly, I think we're coming around to also a moral issue, I think, of the sense of individual liberties and also our responsibility to the common good. That's where a lot of this debate, even over this past year around the pandemic, comes to. If you wear a mask, you are protecting the common good and doing other kinds of practices. But some people just don't see that, and they don't know of that value. And so we give in to individualism a lot. So there. Yeah.
Okay, we're gonna have to wrap it up. Go ahead, Jason. One word. Go ahead.
Well, and to the governor's credit, he has basically been on a political suicide mission. He knows that because of the steps he's taken, he will not be reelected. And so in spite of the fact it's not in his self-interest to take this course of action, I think he's done a lot of what he's done for the common good.
No, Jason, we've got to fight for the governor. We're going to knock doors. We're going to have rallies. We're going to do everything we can because this governor has a heart.
Right.
And that'll bring to a close our program, panel. Lively discussion today on Moral Side of the News. Thank you, Rabbi Gaylia Rooks, Reverend Daniel Corrie Shull, Reverend Jason Crosby, and Father John Stoltz. Until next time, be safe and stay well. So long.